Good morning. It is Monday, May the 2nd, a beautiful day here in Central Indiana. It's great to be with all of you on another edition of Mental Health Monday. I know we're off a little bit of a week because of schedules here, but we're excited to be with you as always. We have a special guest with us here today, Kelly Farrell at Prevail. Kelly, thank you for joining us. I'm joined again by my good friend and local counselor here, owners of Pathways of Healing, Kristen Boice. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Mayor Jenson, and good morning, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so grateful.
Yes, we are so grateful. We are going to tackle, Kristen, we talked early on that we were going to be willing and open to tackle hard topics. And so this morning is going to be one of those. And it's a little delayed because April was Sexual Assault Awareness Month all across the world, really United States. And then May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we're going to cover sexual assault awareness here today on Mental Health Monday. So a beautifully bridged conversation here this morning. So we're honored to have you, Kelly, from Prevail, who really specializes in on this topic. I love having some experts join us besides Kristen and I. Kristen does a phenomenal job. It's always great to have some other people join in this conversation. So we're honored to have you this morning, Kelly.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, talk about something really important that we know our community experiences because it's widespread.
Yeah, you see it every day, I'm sure. And Kristen, you deal with it every day in your office as well. So it's out there. So before we get started, though, a few ground rules. We're excited to have you all listening today. If you want to chime in, today's really going to be more on some just awareness and some overall factual information. If you're listening today and you have a personal story around this topic, we respect that. We would encourage you to reach out directly to those who help deal with this topic. Kristen and Kelly can kind of give some information on who you should reach out to. But if you have a general question about the topic, feel free to put that in the chat. Or if you just want to say hi to, I know there's some loyal listeners out there that love to chime in and say hi as well. Feel free to do that. But if you have a specific instance that you want to discuss around this topic, we would really, really appreciate it. Encourage you to reach out directly to Prevail or to some other resources that Kristen and Kelly can go over with you directly on that. So, but before we get started on any conversation around this, we're going to do some square breathing. So, Kristen, why don't you lead us through that exercise? I got to be at a breakfast last week with Kristen and square breathe in person, which was a lot of fun, but digitally square breathing is just as good. So take it away, Kristen.
Yes, it was nice to see you there. So we are going to do what I do with every client and how we start off our time together is get us centered and present, as some of the things you may hear today may be triggering. And the first thing I want you to do, I like to do a trigger warning, is have you breathe and kind of center yourself. So we're going to start with our feet pressed into the floor. That helps our body to know we're here and now. We're not in the past. We're not in the future. We're right here in the present moment. And we're going to take a deep breath through our nose for 4. We're going to hold for 4 and slowly exhale out our mouths for 8, like we're cooling soup. So let's do 2 breaths together. So let's take a big pressing into our feet, a big deep inhale through our nose. Hold and let it go. Take one more deep breath, press into your feet, big deep inhale. And release. This is a way to come back to center. So at any moment today, throughout your day, remember, you can always come back here, pressing into your feet, breathing through it, breathing through the discomfort or the emotions that might arise.
As I say all the time, it's something I practice every single day. It's the biggest takeaway I've ever taken away from these conversations over the past 2 years is you must breathe. So, Kristen, I will admit last week during your breath exercise at that breakfast, I got something caught in my throat. You might have heard somebody cough in the middle of it. That was me. But I reset myself, rebreathed, and we were all good. So apologize about that. But anyways, all right, we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about sexual assault. We're going to talk about what it is, maybe what it isn't, some ideas, some ways to identify it, how to help yourself, help others. So I'm going to lay that out there, and I'm going to pitch it to Kristen to kind of introduce the topic, and we'll go from there.
One of the things I think is really important that Kelly's going to talk to us about is the cycle, how it looks, whether it's sexual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, or physical abuse. The cycle looks very similar. And so, Kelly, I'd love for you to open up and talk to us. What is it? What's the cycle? And how do we break it? And then the second piece I think is important is in teens. We're seeing more and more and more of this in teens. So that might be the second part of what we want to cover today. So tell us about the cycle of abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are things that I navigate every day. I'm a crime victim advocate at Prevail, and I specialize in working with individuals who've experienced sexual assault or dating violence or exposure to family violence. So all the things that people experience, but no one wants to acknowledge. And part of that is because there is a cycle or a pattern in which domestic violence, dating violence, or sexual abuse happen. Typically, these experiences aren't the first that someone has with either a dating partner or a family member or an acquaintance that might harm them. And that can be really confusing. Just like if you were to go on a date, if the person's first action is to like punch you in the shoulder, that doesn't give a good impression. First date is usually very kind and, you know, the person's charismatic. And that is true when dating violence or domestic violence or sexual assault occur. That person's first experience usually isn't abuse. So there's often this process of grooming where the person who is going to take power and control over someone else starts to test the waters and see what they can get away with. And over time that those behaviors can escalate or become more intense. What is super confusing to people who have experienced dating violence, domestic violence, or sexual violence is that it's not all bad. So the abuse isn't 24/7, 365. There can be really great moments with the person who's causing harm, fun moments even. And so oftentimes we hear, well, if it was really that bad, why wouldn't that person leave? If the kid was really being abused by their family member, why wouldn't they just tell? And it's not that easy because there are fun moments or good moments. And oftentimes the person that's causing harm is meeting some other needs, whether it's financial, place to live, love and connection. So it's these kind of violence experiences are not cut and dry, and that's what makes it really confusing. And the dynamics that we're seeing in domestic violence with adults, we're also seeing in dating violence amongst teens. And I'm even talking like middle school. So the earlier we can talk to our kids, the better. But we're seeing dynamics where one dating partner or one friend is taking power and control over the other. And it's not always overt, like, don't wear that, you can't be friends with them. But it's oftentimes sounds like, I don't really like it when you wear that. You look way cuter in this long sleeve shirt. Or I don't know why you're friends with them. They're so lame. You should just hang out with me. I really care about you. And so the more we listen and understand, the better we're able to start to see those dynamics. And if we're talking specifically about sexual assault, what blows people's minds is about 90% of sexual violence is committed by people that we know, love, and trust. So while stranger danger education is absolutely an important part of the puzzle, it is not the exclusive experience of people. We're way more likely to be hurt by family members, friends, neighbors, or adults that we are supposed to trust. And that, I don't know, it's just not a fun thing to recognize.
Yeah. And I think you saying the myths of abuse, like these are people that can be very charming. They can be complimentary. So when it's really good, it's really good. And when it's really bad, it's really bad. And that's what plays that psychological mind tricks. And then they like to twist it and turn it on you at some point. Can you talk about that? How it creates self-doubt when the person twists it? Well, if you wouldn't have said that, or if you wouldn't have behaved that way, then I wouldn't have done this. Can you speak into that?
Absolutely. So individuals who perpetrate violence against others oftentimes have a great grasp of psychology, or at least of the person that they're abusing, and know how to manipulate the person that they're abusing to maintain that power and control, whether that is denying that they were causing abuse or that they completed abuse, minimizing what they've done, so it's not that bad, you're being dramatic, or totally blame shifting onto the victims. Yeah, saying things like, well, if you would have just had dinner on the table when I got home, I wouldn't have had to hit you. Or if you weren't wearing that nightgown, I wouldn't be attracted to you. From the outside perspective, you're like, oh my gosh, that's disgusting. That's not logical. But when a person has power and control over another, those things are really easy. And the person who's experienced that abuse, their perception of themselves has been so broken down that oftentimes that they believe that's what they deserve, or the person who's abusive has told them, like, no one else will love you, or no one else is going to care about you. Or if it's a child and that's their caregiver, it's really hard to believe that that's not the way it's supposed to be if that's always been their experience. And then us as a society have a huge part in this too. Oftentimes when people come forward to talk about their experience with domestic violence or sexual assault, they're not met with a, I believe you, that sucks, I'm so sorry that happened. Usually it's, well, weren't you drinking? Why were you with them? It couldn't really be that bad. You stayed with them for 7 years. And so our culture has made it very challenging for someone who is a survivor to share their experiences and have someone say, you know what, you don't deserve to be treated that way. Or, let me help you. What do you need? How can I do that? As opposed to what they usually get, which is pretty dismissive or blaming them. And I don't know about you, but that's, if I've been through a traumatic experience, I don't want other people to blame me for what has happened. So I'd rather not say anything. And then that leaves us where we are now, which is violence is permitted, it's acceptable, it's swept under the rug, and we are surrounded by people who are struggling because they're afraid to speak out.
And when someone says, the one thing I tell people when they say, because they've been told no one's going to believe you. No one's going to believe you. And so when they do get the courage to finally say something and they're not believed, that is one of the most damaging things you could do to somebody in trauma and fear, is to not believe them. And so that means you got to do your own work. And one of the things I say to people is that I believe you, and it's not your fault. Now, they may not believe that right away, that it's not their fault. Can you talk about that a little bit? How people can really struggle with feeling like they're responsible?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things that play into that. One is if that person that's harming them has created that narrative, which is really common, they've probably heard that 100, 200 times. So it's going to take a lot more experiences of people believing them and understanding them to start to rebalance that. And the other piece is that we as humans naturally seek responsibility for things that aren't our fault. We want to make sense of things. We want there to be logic, and our world is chaos sometimes. And so if we can say, yep, that was my fault. It's my fault that, I went to that party and I drank and I wore that dress and I was flirting with that person. So it's my fault that sexual assault happened. If I create this new set of rules, which is total baloney, but would make sense in that moment, then maybe I can prevent this from happening again. I'll never wear that dress. I'll throw it out. I'll never go to a party. I'll never drink. I'll never flirt. And then maybe, I'll be safe. And so that is a person who's had their control or power over their body taken away, trying to reinstill that sense of I'm in command of my life, because we all need that. We all need to feel empowered. And sexual violence isn't about sex, despite the word in it. Sex is the weapon, and power and control is what is being sought. So it isn't that somebody is so attracted to you that they can't help themselves or is so passionately interested or whatever. It's that person decided that their wants and needs are more important than someone else's, and they sought to seek power and control over the other person. So if I can create these rules in my life to regain a sense of power and control, maybe I'll be safe. Maybe I'll be okay.
So let's talk about prevention, because like when someone does disclose that this is going on, let's talk about what do we say? What do we do? How do we help? And what's hurtful and harmful in those situations?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our response is so important because we know, I think about it like in money, because we all are aware of money. So getting help costs are some emotional money. And if I've already experienced this trauma, I might only have a couple of dimes in my emotional bank account. And reaching out, calling a hotline, calling Prevail, talking to a friend, that's going to cost, 10, 20 cents. And so not everyone, we've got to recognize not everyone is in a place to be able to afford that emotionally. So whenever somebody does reach out, we have to obviously recognize how challenging that is and recognize that they gave us a gift. So a survivor doesn't owe anyone their story, and what they have to overcome to share that is a lot. So whenever somebody is saying, hey, this is what happened to me, hey, this is what I'm worried about, they're paying you a tremendous kindness because they trust you enough to share their personal experience that they own with you. And so please honor that. So like Kristen said, I believe you. It's not your fault. What would you like to do? I'm here for you regardless, and be about it. So if you say you're going to follow up with them, if you say you're going to go somewhere with them, do that. They're so used to people saying one thing and doing another that you could be inadvertently harming them more. And then really allow them, the person who shared their experience with you, to make their own decisions. So as an advocate, my job isn't to say, I know what's best for you because you've experienced this trauma, so do X, Y, and Z. My job is to say, thank you for coming here. Thank you for telling me about this experience. What do you think would be helpful? Or here are some options that I'm seeing based on what you've told me. What makes sense? What do you want to start first? What do you want to try? What do you need more information about? And really walking alongside of them on the journey, which means everyone's experience is different. Everyone's perception of the trauma that they've experienced is different. So their healing is going to be different. And this is a mind bomb every time I say it, but trauma, like dating violence, domestic violence, and sexual assault, happens in the context of a relationship. Trauma like that is healed in the context of a relationship, not in the context of a relationship that was harmful, but in healthy, safe, supportive ones. So the thing that survivor is most afraid of is the thing that they need the most to heal. So if they've reached out to you and said, hey, I need help, you have the opportunity to be a huge asset to this person's healing process, because we can't heal in a vacuum. What can be really damaging, obviously going back on your word, not believing them, or saying anything that would cast judgment, or anything that is shaming. Victim blaming is something that is very common. Things like, what were you wearing? Why did you do that? Are you sure? He's so nice. I can't believe this would happen. All of those things are reinforcing these messages that I did something wrong, that I deserve this, that I shouldn't have talked about it. So our words are extremely powerful. And one of my mentors has always said, no interaction is neutral. Everything is either healing or harming, and you get to decide what that is. And so, like Kristen says, do your work. So supporting someone who's experienced trauma, especially if you've experienced your own trauma, is really complicated. So do your work. Go to counseling, talk to an advocate, do research online, work on centering yourself so that not only can you support your friend or family member, but you can take care of yourself too. And I think the more we all take care of ourselves and on our own experiences, the more we're able to create a community that's healthier and doesn't tolerate violence anymore.
One of the things I see a lot is if someone is a parent and they've had their own sexual assault history, or they've been molested or been abused in any way, and then it happens to their child, it's almost like, and maybe they were around the same age it happened, it's resurrecting all of that trauma within that parent. And I hold all the compassion, all the space to say, that makes so much sense. And now's the time for you to do your healing too. So you can offer a different way of witnessing that trauma and acknowledging that trauma for your kid that you didn't get. And so I try to create some encouragement and some love and some grace, because they might have buried that for so long and thought, I put that away and I'm never dealing with that again. And it's both men and women that this has happened to. Can you talk a little bit about the statistics on just how, like, boys, girls, what's the numbers look like?
Yeah. So it's really staggering. About 1 in 4 self-identified women will experience sexual violence in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 male identifying people will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. About half of individuals who identify as trans experience sexual violence, and 9 out of every 10 individuals with disabilities experience sexual violence. That's atrocious. There shouldn't be identities where a normal part of that experience is sexual assault. And yet it is. And I think what's really challenging to reconcile is that violence happens because it's permitted, right? And that's not something that we want to acknowledge. We want to say, we already have these systems in place for these things to stop. And yet every 68 seconds, a new American experiences sexual violence. So there's more to this.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit on the grooming behaviors? Because I think that's something people don't realize. They're like, well, they're being nice to me. Or maybe you were deprived of something, an unmet need. And then all of a sudden someone's giving that to you. And that feels good. So can you talk about some of the grooming behaviors?
Yeah. So grooming is a process of building trust between someone who will eventually perpetrate a crime and someone who will be the victim. This can happen at any age. So adults are groomed too, and the community is groomed. Oftentimes, when we find out of an adult who's committed sex crimes against children or teens, we are shocked because they're oftentimes people that we've trusted, that are in, well-respected positions. And everyone says, well, I didn't see that coming. I had no idea. Did you know? Like, can you believe this? And the truth is everyone was groomed by that person. So oftentimes an individual, if we're specifically talking about sexual abuse, will seek someone who is kind of ripe for the picking, as perpetrators call it, but individuals who are maybe isolated or outcasts, who have a disability or something that makes them less able to advocate for themselves, people who are passive or maybe less likely to speak up, and people who perpetrate sex crimes, particularly sexual abuse, kind of seek out and know what those risk factors are, and then build a relationship. So if that kid maybe doesn't have a strong relationship with parents or is being raised by their grandparents, they might fill that parental role. And at the beginning, there's nothing for us to worry about. That seems really kind. It's always important for us to look out for our kids in our community. But there's a point where that line is crossed, and that person might start to have sexual conversations with the child that are inappropriate, or touch them without consent, to start to break down those boundaries and enhance that child's comfort with what will eventually be very inappropriate or dangerous interactions. So I call it like a boiled frog. So if you have a pot of boiling water, you throw in a frog, the frog's going to jump right out. It's going to be like, holy crap, that's hot. I don't want to be in there. Whereas if you have a pot of room temperature water, you put a frog in it, it's going to chill out like, hey, it's my own pond. And if you slowly turn the heat up, the frog isn't going to recognize that the danger is imminent, because it's not going to notice from a degree to a degree. And the frog will stay in the pot and get boiled alive. And people are the same way. If somebody, meets us the first time, punches us in the face, we're going to know that they're not safe. But if those behaviors slowly change over time, we're not going to recognize that, especially if we care about them, or if we've taught to forgive people when they hurt us, or, forgive, forget, move on. We might not recognize these things until it's really bad. And so I think that's an important thing to recognize too. Abusive relationships don't start abusive. Sexual abuse doesn't start as sexual abuse. It's all a progression. And so oftentimes the victim of those things doesn't recognize it until it's really bad. And then they're stuck. And people on the outside might not recognize it until, things have progressed pretty far. So it's shocking, right, to think about these things.
Is there anything as we kind of wrap up prevention wise that you wanted to mention that would be helpful that we didn't touch on?
So a big part of what advocacy is, so anti-violence movement, is seeing that we all are participants in this, in the anti-violence movement, not in perpetration of violence. And so if we have a concern about a friend or family member or somebody that we work with or somebody in the community, we all should feel empowered to reach out to that person and say, like, hey, are you okay? I'm worried about you, or I've noticed you're struggling, or something has changed. And this can be true with like exposure to trauma or mental health, to say, like, you know, hey, I notice things are different. Like, can we talk about this? Or I really care about you. So often we hear from survivors who say, like, no one cared. No one noticed. I, would come to work really, like, I'd been crying all weekend, or, I didn't look well and no one said anything. So I want us to all feel empowered to look out for each other. We live in the Midwest, which is very much a personal matters or family matters, and that's private. But those beliefs of, like, oh, what's happening next door is none of my business because that's not my family, those things allow violence to occur. So in reality, we're all related. We're all human beings, and we all are responsible for taking care of ourselves and each other. So if we see something we're concerned about, let's talk about it. If there are things that we can do to start to open up conversations in the groups that we're a part of, or in our friends or our family circles, let's talk about those things. If people are making rape jokes or homophobic jokes or transphobic jokes or jokes about people from other countries, let's shut those things down. Because while it might seem like a joke, those behaviors start to normalize violence against other people, which is what allows sexual assault to happen.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. This is an incredible conversation, Kelly. You're awesome. Back to your last point there, not only do I'm sure victims say, no one ever said anything to me about it, but how often does something happen and we are just as guilty of being like, yeah, I did notice, this and didn't want to say anything, or, and I've tried to normalize in our culture here of just sometimes just openly asking people, in respectful ways, how are you doing? What's going on? Tell me. And so I just think it's on all of us to play a part and to check our awkwardness at the door, or our, whatever that may be. Sometimes we just got to strip back the layers a little bit and be honest with those conversations. So real quickly, before we turn to kind of where people can turn to at Prevail, are you guys seen any trends recently? Anything different that you're seeing in the last year or two with COVID around this topic?
Yeah, unfortunately, COVID, wasn't good for survivors of violence either. We didn't necessarily see more individuals experiencing violence, but the violence it increased in frequency and intensity for those who were already experiencing that, and then had limited access to be able to report those things or get support. And we saw specifically in with survivors of sexual violence, a tool that they have in their disposal is going to the hospital to receive medical care. But when the hospital is a place that's full of people who are sick and we're told, avoid the emergency room, but the message isn't avoid the emergency room unless you've experienced sexual violence, and then please come. That was a huge kind of put off. So there were a lot of people who experienced sexual violence who would absolutely benefit from medical care, but going to the hospital, being exposed to COVID was too scary and not worth it. And so I anticipate there are individuals, today that would have really benefited from that to kind of kickstart their healing process that are still unsure of what to do. And so that's been really challenging.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing all this. This was incredible. Kristen, you took every question I had. You were just perfect. So covered an incredibly difficult topic, but something that we need to dive into and be aware of. We all have a role to play in the prevention and the assistance of those who are dealing with this. Kristen, do you want to help close us out of if someone's dealing with this issue or really any issue of mental strain or mental health, where can they turn right now?
Well, the one place I love that is going to be changing in July, I think it's July 15th, there's going to be, instead of 911, oh, I didn't write it down, but it's 1-800-273-TALK. And it's the suicide prevention hotline. I had someone when I was speaking at a keynote last week where I saw you come up to me afterwards and they said, I'm scared. Like I said, you can actually put them on speakerphone and talk to them while the person is with you. So they're like, oh, I said, you don't have to do all the talking. Let them talk. It's 24 hours. Call 1-800-273-TALK, put it on speaker, and you can have the support and the wave of just like, oh, okay, I could do that. I'm like, yeah, you don't have to do this by yourself. So if you're with somebody that's struggling, put it on speakerphone, be right there with them. And you don't have to feel like you have to have all the right words. So that's my number one referral. And then I'm going to turn it to Kelly on how to get a hold of Prevail.
Sure. So Prevail is located in Hamilton County. We're in Noblesville, a few blocks from the historic courthouse, and we provide victim advocacy and assistance to kids, teens, and adults who've experienced any sort of crime or abuse. So with that, we are a registered rape crisis center, as well as a designated domestic violence service provider, and serve survivors of human trafficking, burglary, armed robbery, homicide, suicide, the whole gamut. Everything we do is free and confidential and is focused on helping that person identify their healing path and supporting them on that journey. So oftentimes we work alongside a therapist like Kristen, so that way their mental health needs are met. And we're meeting a lot of the other needs like housing, court support, advocacy within schools, group support. We provide support groups. We also have a 24/7 crisis line where we're responding to our area hospitals, crime scenes, and police departments to support survivors in the moment when getting support is super crucial. So feel free to reach out to us. We also have a 24/7 crisis line for our community. So if somebody's like, I don't even know where to start, I just realized this, or my friend shared this with me, I don't even know where to start, they can call our crisis line. And then I really recommend RAIN. So that is a national organization for sexual assault survivors or sexual violence survivors. They have a 1-800 number available 24/7 for people who just need to tell their story or are ready to connect with somebody, but maybe not see someone face to face. So lots of great resources. I know it's scary to reach out for help. You deserve to have support. You deserve to have people on your side. You deserve to be believed. So when you find that courage to take a step, please know there are people out here ready to embrace you and help you on your way.
Can you list the website and the phone number for Prevail? Because some people may need to know.
Yes. So Prevail website is prevailinc.org, and our office number is 317-773-6942, and you can reach us 24/7 using that line.
And I want to put a plug in here real quick for the teen support groups. If you have a teen struggling with an unhealthy relationship and they have trouble breaking free of that, you guys have the most amazing teen support groups out there. And they walk through what are the signs, what is the cycle, how to break the cycle, how to empower the teen to have a voice. And that early intervention is critical. If you can have someone have early intervention, that matters for the rest of their life. So if you're in doubt, that your teen programs are the best. So I just want to put a quick plug in for those.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Well, Kelly and Kristen, thank you. It means a lot to us that you guys would take time to give of your time today. So, and hopefully there's plenty of resources out there. Know that you're not alone in this journey. And we will see you back here in 2 weeks for another edition of Mental Health Monday. Kristen and Kelly, thank you again.
Thank you.